Welcome, everybody, to this episode of The Complete Advisor. We have with me two awesome guests, Eddie Zavala, Taylor Parmigiano.
Good job.
I got it right. So to introduce you to Eddie and Taylor, Eddie has a thriving practice down in Houston, a land of humidity and great seafood. Also the oil industry, right? Mm-hmm. Massive.
Got a few of those.
A little bit. Taylor is Chief Operating Officer, making sure that the trains are running on time down there for Eddie's practice. And what I wanted to talk about, I was reading an article the other day. In fact, I got it right here. And it talked about some of the deadly sins of year-end financial planning that trip up advisors. I'm curious I'm going to hit a couple of these. I want to hear, I'll lay it out to you and tell you what the sin is that ends up happening. And then I'd love to hear how you combat this or how you address it in your office. So the first one is that the first of the four deadly sins of year-end financial planning that we'll talk about. These are the kind of things that if you make that lapse, your client could walk out the door to another advisor. The first one that they talk about is missing RMDs, those required minimum distributions. And I'll set the table first. I remember when I was in private practice, the frustration of chasing down that maybe that kid that had an RMD or somebody, just that small one. Do you run into that? How do you combat it? How do you address that so it doesn't become a deadly sin?
Well, I think setting expectations is really important. So I typically advise clients as often as possible to try to set up their RMDs on an automatic schedule. Mm-hmm. Reason being is that life events can happen. You don't want a client to be hospitalized or something, or take that random trip overseas and it be the year end and they be in the mode, and this is where training is important, but they'd be the ones to tell you when to take the RMD, because if you can't get a hold of them, then you have a problem. So I recommend scheduling it automatic so that there's no issue regardless of your life events. If the client does not want to do it that way, I say that's fine, we can accommodate, but I'm going to notate your account, let you know that I told you to do it this way. We're certainly going to contact you, but just know that this is a risk. And then if it happens 3 years later, you can always point back to them and say, we talked about this and I laid out the risk, and this is all about setting expectations.
Now, so that's the answer from the command bridge of your practice. Let's talk about where the rubber meets the road. What steps do you take? What on the infrastructure side? Reminders?
Tracking. Taking a look at the notes the advisor applies to the client's profile, and making sure that my team is doing everything that we can to keep the advisor moving in the right direction with those.
Do you, with tracking, do you, I'm assuming, because now this today is like the first, well, we met yesterday a little bit, but my hunch, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my hunch about you guys. I feel like there's a lot of structure, and there are a few things that get missed in your practice. Do you guys do a weekly meeting, staff meeting? How often do you meet with the team to cover kind of these things?
Usually, outside of events that are unforeseen, usually we try to meet at least twice a month to kind of talk about all things operations. We also have a master Excel sheet that we update throughout the year, kind of tracking RMDs and various other things that are time sensitive for clients. That way, at the end of the year, we're doing a verification, not a complete workup of trying to find all this different data. So this year's a little weird because TD Ameritrade was absorbed by Schwab, so it creates some operational challenges. But because of that structure, we're not drowning right now at year end trying to figure out who's done what and what needs to happen by the end of the year.
So you keep an eye, though, on any stray doggies that are out there that need to, the McGillicuddies, we got to get that, we've got one or two out, and you alert the team and say, hey, Eddie, we need to poke the Johnsons because they need to get some money going. Because, when there's errors like that, it's never necessarily the fault that they were in Malta for half the year and not answering their phone. It ends up, why didn't you tell me?
And documentation is so important, right? So my staff knows we need to have 2-3 emails. We need to have 2-3 different call attempts with voicemails. At that point, if we've done all the, setting the expectations up front and we've contacted them and we've emailed them, at some point the client has to bear some responsibility.
So the next one that was on here that I wanted to talk about was, it says, assuming clients will remember tax loss selling and the importance of that. One, how do you keep that top of mind, and when do you start looking at that, or is that a kind of an end of the year thing, or are you always cognizant of that as the year goes on?
So I do periodic reviews of my accounts on a monthly basis. The taxable accounts, I manage those specifically per client. So I serve as their portfolio manager, and we harvest losses periodically. I think that that's a topic of conversation throughout the year, especially as we start going into tax planning.
Yeah.
I use tax software to help clients understand what an actual tax loss carry forward looks like, how it impacts their taxes, and the fact that we're actually paying attention. And most people haven't even heard of it before because their investments are being automated and maybe the right things aren't being done on the backside.
So Taylor, is that anything that you keep an eye on, of like, hey, the Smith's account's getting way out there? Or
I keep an eye on the fact that I'm aware of what notes he's putting in with the clients. I'm aware of all the client connections and touches that he has with them. So just on an idea of I see what's going on, that I leave in his very, very capable hands.
Nice. Okay, so let's move on to the next one, the third of the four here. The best part is you flip the page, but you don't know. I'm playing, it's dealer's choice here, so I'm throwing this one out to you. I know that when we get to the end of the quarter, I know maybe for maybe not as seasoned advisors, all of a sudden it gets really busy and you have to ram in all these appointments. How do you handle making sure that it doesn't become just this cluster of appointments in the last couple weeks of the year so that you all can enjoy yourself a little bit and not be stressed out? Or is that how it is? I don't know. What goes on in the office?
It's never a perfect system because a lot of it has to do with what's convenient for clients.
Yep.
I want to make sure the experience is always at the highest level, but generally speaking, in a perfect world, I have my year mapped out based on what time frames look good. So like annual reviews, I like to get a lot of those out of the way during the summertime when things are slower. Beginning of the year, we're doing tax planning and really focused on what's going on with taxes, making sure they have a smooth experience with tax preparation, that they're doing the right things. End of the year, we're talking about Roth conversions, looking at all the income sources that came in and checking on insurances and just doing a checkup completely on everything so that we don't miss something. If you can schedule these things out in a year and keep it consistent, then the client gets in a habit and we know what's going on, and then there's always the ability to be flexible as times warrant it.
You put your own seasonality into your calendar.
I try to. I mean, I just know generally what works. We try to fit people in within those seasons, explain to them why we do Roth conversions at the end of the year. Well, because we don't know what other income sources you forgot to tell us about at the beginning of the year that could hit. So, there's logic to it, and clients appreciate that. Again, it's all about having open communication, under-promising, over-delivering, and, also accepting the fact that we're all humans and, there are time constraints, right?
Yeah. So, Taylor, when it comes to the communication as Chief Operating Officer, what methods are you all using in the practice?
Communicating with the clients is all about, regardless of what it is, documenting it. We're big, not sticklers, but you talk to a client, you reach out to a client, you think about a client, it goes on as a note. And that way I'm aware of what my team is doing and when they touch clients and when they reach out. Eddie's also aware that, hey, I see that we've tried calling a couple times, we've left a couple voicemails, there was an email last week, we need to get this scheduled. So regardless of how we communicate, it's all 100% documented. But to speak to our side of what Eddie just explained, it's really about tracking for me and understanding and being familiar with each of the advisors' clients, knowing the clients that appreciate and come in more than once a year, knowing the clients that I'm going to have to try 8 different times before you call me back. And knowing that if I get them in the beginning of the year, we're going to structure that as an annual review. So if I don't get you back in by the end of the year, I'm covered, you're covered, we've got the notes on it, and just being very, very familiar.
Protecting your practice is very important. I mean, it really, and protecting yourself and also protecting the client, making sure that they understand what's going on and why you're doing things. That is super important. That takes us to our last, the fourth one, that I thought at first when I read it, I'm like, well, when I read the headline, I'm like, wait, assuming clients are too busy to talk, that seems silly. But the more I think about it, as you look at that, there is the assumption, and from my side of the table, I see that on our side of the industry of, behavior that we see, and we make these narratives of like, well, advisors are always gone in the summer, they're doing vacations. Like, no, a lot of advisors are they're working. So we make some of these assumptions. And I know that when we get into fall, it does come into like, well, there's Thanksgiving and then the kids are home and no one's going to want to meet. And that becomes kind of a, I don't know, like
stigmatism.
Yeah, like a little stereotype. So how do you make sure, and I already know the answer from talking to you so far, how do you make sure that you don't fall into that trap of like, well, let's take that couple days there before Thanksgiving, no one's going to want to do anything?
I think for myself personally, I do like to communicate with clients regularly through blast emails and things like that, and just hit different topics and just create a space where they can respond back and hit me with a question or create engagement, or again, part of that whole scheduling people out in advance, you kind of limit that because, so you talk to someone in January that said, oh yeah, we can come in for our quarterly meeting if their situation warrants that, consistent schedule of meeting. I can come in for my quarterly in November or December. Well, you had them on the books already, so we do schedule people far out in advance as tentative schedules. We remind them a week or two before, and we adjust if needed. But that way, there's always a wheel of clients on the schedule, on the books regularly.
Activity, that's good. When I read this and as I think about having read the article and then looking at it, I think that what's interesting is if you're managing your practice and you're staying on top of it and you're doing planning in advance, like you're talking about, looking not at what are we going to do in November, but what are we going to do in 2024? Taking those bigger views and then laying out a plan, I think that pretty much solves just about all of these if you're forward thinking with your practice instead of waiting for things to happen.
And I also think it has a lot to do with remembering they want to communicate with us. They have come to the table. They've worked with Eddie. They are part of our team in the approach of taking care of them. So assuming anything outside of the fact that you want to hear from us, I'm never going to bother anyone.
Sure.
There's obviously lines about bugging them, but call, always reach out, always send that email, because you can't assume anything about what's going on with them except for the fact they want to hear from you.
I like it.
And also, too, from that standpoint, too, we try to layer in educational events and client events. And, we even bring in clients where we're doing prospective client events. I mean, they can be your best advocate sometimes, and they want to be involved. And so if you don't ask, you'll never know. But I think that's just looking down the line. I always think you need to be looking at least a year down the line. And if you kind of keep that focused, then things start to fall in place and they start to automate. And then you're doing less scrambling. And then it's a consistent experience for clients. And they appreciate that because they need to know how to work with you. And they want to know how to work with you so they can get the best results.
I like it. That's where we'll put a pin in this one. I thank you both for being on here, for humoring me with the topic. And it's been a pleasure to have you on. I look forward to having you back as guests in the future, hearing how things are going. For everybody else, thanks for joining us for this episode. If you get a chance, would love it if you'd subscribe or follow, so that way you're up to date on whatever the next episode is that we're dropping out. And if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, I love comments. I'd love to know what you think about what we just talked about, ways that you combat it. Put them in there. I respond, and I love to learn. So thanks for being here, and we'll see you next episode.